Okay, welcome Dorothy to this Zoom interview. And for anybody who follows the Telling Our Story series of interviews, will be very familiar with your voice, but you're always on the other side of the camera. So this time, it's your turn to be in front of the camera. You've done loads of interviews for the Irish region, so thank you very much for that. So we'll just get going on the interview. I suppose my first question to you would be one that you've asked many sisters. Can you tell me about where you were born, where you grew up, a little bit about your family, where you went to school, all that sort of very old background information?
I think most people think I'm a dub, but I was actually born in Clones in County Monaghan, very close to the border. My father's home, he was from Fermanagh, but it was very close to Clones. Clones probably would be the closest town to them, although it was between Clones and Rosslea. My mother was actually a Belfast woman, so connections are northern, but and my father's family, his father and probably grandfather, they had a spade mill. They had one just outside Clones, and they made handmade spades. You can even see them in the Ulster Folk Museum. Wow. So I don't remember that much about Clones in my early years because we left Clones when I was 4 or 5. But I had already started school in the St. Louis Primary School, the old primary school up Churchill beside the church.
Wow, yeah.
So I think my family were kind of close to the sisters there. We moved then to Dublin. And for a little while, I went to the Sisters of Charity in Lakelands in Sandymount because my grandmother lived across the road. My mother's family left Belfast during the Blitz in 1941.
Oh, wow.
My grandmother and an aunt lived there in Sandymount. Then my mother discovered I don't know how she discovered that there was a Louis convent in Rathmines and a primary school. And she couldn't wait to get me in there. So I started and I did first class in St. Louis Primary School in Rathmines. And after that, I went to St. Louis Secondary School in Kilchima as a boarder for my secondary education. And it was during those years, actually, that I got to know Clones and my father's place, because every summer I went up there to the farm just across the border from Clones, where I had 4 girl cousins, and I went there for my summer holidays every year. We used to have a great time.
Yeah, it's great getting away from the city like that when you're a child.
I don't really like the city that much. I prefer the wide open spaces. So that was my education, St. Louis, and St. Louis.
And lots of different St. Louis schools. You had quite a taste of 4 or 5 really as a child.
Well, just 3 as a child. Clones, Rathmines, and then Kilchima.
Yeah. That's a lot though.
Yes. So I always say, if there's anything wrong with, I'm the way I am because of my education.
Yeah, so I mean, you certainly would have come across more sisters of St. Louis during your childhood than, say, a typical.
Yes, because even when I went on my holidays, myself and my cousins, we used to visit the convent.
Oh, wow.
Innocence, to see the nuns when I was in Clones. But I didn't have the slightest intention of entering, I might add, at that time. So I don't know what happened anyway.
What changed?
I don't know. I mean, I was very impressed with the sisters in Kilchima, in the boarding school. I suppose it was the first time I would have seen sisters as sort of human beings. I didn't know what they were really when I was in the primary school. You know, there was men, women, and there were nuns. So I saw them as human beings then. And when I did my, when I was doing my Leaving Cert, there was an exhibition in either the RDS or the Mansion House, and all the religious orders were there for some reason or another. So I went to that, and you see, I really wanted to be a missionary.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't, like St. Louis wouldn't have been my first choice, because you wouldn't necessarily be sent on the missions. So I thought I might go to the Columbans, because I had an uncle, a Columban priest, and the Columbans were missionaries. I had an aunt, a Loretta nun, I might go to the Lorettas. Anyway, I said, I know the Louis best, so I'll go to the Louis. And my aunt, the Loretta nun, was very sort of magnanimous. She wasn't all miffed that I didn't go to the Loretta. Not that she ever even hinted or suggested that I should enter the convent, you know. And I also had a first cousin in St. Louis at that time, Sister Margaret Flynn. She died some years ago. So I ended up in the novitiate in Monaghan.
What kind of changed it for you, or what, you know, you were saying that the Sisters of St. Louis weren't necessarily an order that you would choose if you wanted to go on mission. What changed for you then? How come you picked them over the Lorettas or the Columbans?
I'll tell you what changed it. I decided what I knew might be safer than what I didn't know.
Yeah, absolutely. We can all relate to that.
I said, the devil you know.
Yeah.
I ended up in Monaghan, to the surprise of a lot of people. So the novitiate was quite a culture shock to the system. Even though boarding school, with hindsight, wasn't far removed from being in a novitiate, but anyway.
And what made it such a shock? I suppose because you were used to boarding school, so.
Boarding school, but the rules and the regulation and the silence and everything was, they kind of did everything different from the way we did it in the boarding school, somehow.
Okay.
Of course, you got up very early in the morning. Well, we got up early in the morning in boarding school to go to Mass, but we got up a little earlier in the convent. So the novitiate, it was, I remember before I entered, I remember one of the sisters in Kilchuma, one of the sisters who taught me, saying to me, you know, she said, I envy you because you're entering at a very exciting time. The Vatican Council, the Second Vatican Council is starting. And she felt that was going to bring a whole lot of changes, which it did, of course.
And what year now was this exactly?
1962. So we didn't have newspapers or radio or anything, but we had reading in the dining room during meals, during dinner anyway. And, you know, the bits about the Vatican Council were read out. So we knew what was going on. So what I was going to say was we were kind of trained in the monastic tradition.
Mm-hmm.
Strange, because we were really apostolic sisters, which means work in schools or whatever, hospitals, as opposed to the monastic being the Carmelites and the Poor Clares. So, but I think it stood us well, that training is, you know, with hindsight, shall we say. So after my first profession, I was surprisingly, I was transferred. I wasn't expecting to be going to England. I was transferred to Newmarket in Suffolk.
Okay.
It was a smallish community. And of course, everybody knows that Newmarket is where the horses are. So my memories of Newmarket are from about 5 o'clock in the morning, the sound of horses passing on their way to the heath for their training. And they were practically passed all day. And you had to give way to horses in Newmarket. They had right of way and one thing and another. But you didn't get out much in those days. So needless to say, I wasn't at a race, or I didn't know Newmarket, the town. So normally if you were sent to England, you stayed there for 3 years until it was time for your final profession. And in fact, some of the people that went to England at the same time as me are still there. But I was transferred back to Ireland after 1 year, and I...
what did you do for that year that you were in Newmarket?
Sorry, I was teaching.
Okay. Primary school.
In the beginning, they were waiting for a maths and science teacher, and that in my background, so I was teaching biology, and I also taught religion. Now, it was very unusual. I had a 5th form religion class. Only 3 of them were Catholics.
Okay.
The bulk of the school would have been non-Catholic, the bulk of the students. But because they came to the Catholic school, they had to stay for the religion classes, because who would mind them during the religion?
Okay.
So that was it. So that was very weird.
Yeah.
In religion to non-Catholic, shall we say.
Would they have just been sitting there, I guess, listening to you, or were they engaging in their own activities while you were teaching the other 3 children?
Yes, I think they probably listened. I can't really remember this.
Yeah.
So after my year in Newmarket, oh yeah, I'll tell you one thing. We were the last group to be professed in the old habit, what we call the box, the square habit.
Yeah, yeah.
At Easter in 1966, we changed into the new habit. We called it the halo. I don't know if you know what that one looks like. I've been looking for photographs, but I don't have many photographs from that time. It was very hard on your ears. It was a stiff thing, and it came around here and it cut the ears of you. But we called it the halo. So on Easter Sunday, we went out to Mass in Newmarket, the 7 or 8 of us. And the people were wondering why the sisters weren't at Mass, because they didn't recognize us. They thought we were some other group.
Oh my gosh.
So after Mass, of course, they discovered who we were, and it was freezing that day. Oh, we were frozen because the habit was lighter and everything. So that was Newmarket. So then I came over to Dundalk, and I was teaching in Dundalk. Dundalk had boarders at that time. It was a small boarding school. The bulk of the pupils would have been day students. So that was quite a change for me. I was sleeping in a boarder's dormitory, serving boarders meals, supervising their study, their recreation, seeing them to bed, getting them up in the morning. Anyway, and I taught there. I taught Irish and history and geography, and I liked my time in Dundalk. There was a crowd of young sisters there, and we used to have a good laugh every now and then. So towards the end of the year, the end of the year for us would be July, August, whatever. I got a letter from one of the central team at that time, and it said I was to go to UCD and to do science. And my subjects were physics, chemistry, botany, and zoology. And the sisters in Dundalk were amazed because they could see me as going to do arts. I mean, I was kind of into languages and things like that, but they never saw me as a science person. But anyway.
You yourself as a science person? Were you surprised yourself?
Not really, because I forgot to say in the novitiate, I had done physics and chemistry in school, So when I was a novice, I did physics and chemistry again for my leaving cert, and I did botany. So I think that was remote preparation. So off I set to Dublin, and at that stage, the science faculty had moved to Belfield, and it was the only faculty in the place. So it was quite homely in a sense. We kind of knew most people, even though there were a lot of them. One faculty, I suppose. So,
and was that the old, you know, what's the science block? Was that the old science building? Was
yes,
that built back then? Yeah, the kind of green one.
The green one with the glasses.
Yeah, I got my degree in that building as well.
The head of the physics department was Professor Nevin.
Right.
Called the science block Glass Nevin.
Very good.
All the glass in it. So off I went there. 4 of us went.
Sorry, you just froze there for a moment. So what you were saying was you kind of froze there at the Glass Nevin bit. So what were the subjects you studied?
I did in first year, I did physics, chemistry, botany, and zoology.
Very good.
And I had no choice of subjects in the second year. If you were in that group, there was no choice. So I had to do botany, zoology, and biochemistry. And that suited me fine. I'm not a mathematical person. I'm not great at maths. So I didn't like physics.
Yeah.
And I love zoology. Biochemistry was so. So that's what I did. And I can see now the reason that was because biology was coming in as a subject for leaving cert.
Right.
Up to that, it had not been a subject. So 1970, biology, that was the first year biology was on the leaving cert.
So they needed more teachers.
Most of the teachers, you see, most of the science teachers had maths, physics, chemistry. They had very few with botany and zoology.
So before 1970, you had biology and chemistry were leaving cert subjects?
No. 1970 was, well, they had to start teaching it, I suppose, beforehand. But 1970 was the first year it was on the leaving cert.
Yeah.
Examined on the leaving cert. So 1970, I did my degree in 1970 and was transferred. Well, I had to go to Rathmines because I was doing my dip in Earlsfort Terrace. And I had the leaving cert class for biology because I was the only qualified biology teacher, although there was another science teacher taking at another class. So that was exciting, actually, and also a bit nerve-wracking because being the first year, you had no idea what might come up. But anyway, the class did okay. And I forgot to say, for my last year in Belfield, the arts students moved out to Belfield. The arts building was ready. There was building going on all the time. The ugliest concrete thing I ever saw. And it spoiled our little atmosphere because we had to go over there to the canteen, and it was so impersonal after our little closeness, shall we say, in the science block. And I also forgot to say that during that time there was the student unrest, and the students from Earlsfort Terrace came out, and this was probably 68, and they disrupted our lectures. And it was all right.
What was this unrest about?
I'm not sure. At the same time, there was unrest in the Sorbonne, and it was on the news every day, this trouble in the Sorbonne. And in Dublin, the students decided they were going to think, I hope I'm not libeling anybody, but I have a funny feeling Pat Rabbit and Kevin Myers were students at that time, I think. And we got away for days without getting involved, but they didn't like that. I mean, the students in Earlsfort Terrace. So it meant we missed practicals, which could never be repeated. But anyway, that was it. I have gone back. So where was I? I was teaching in Rathmines, doing my dip. So at the end of that year, I was transferred again. I was transferred to Carrickmacross.
Okay.
They obviously needed a biology and science teacher. And my mother decided that my sister would go as a boarder. She was just finishing 6th class in Rathmines Primary School. I wasn't dying about the idea, but she was transferred anyway. And she had to come with, she came with me anyway. Well, she didn't come at the same time. So I had her, I taught her.
Wow, that must have been very strange. Certainly initially, I'd imagine.
The beginning, and then I got used to it. I just treated her like one of the others. And I was fortunate in that she was well behaved.
And you're lucky. You were lucky, definitely.
She never gave me or anybody else any trouble.
Oh, that's good to hear.
Now and then. So I had 7, I think 71 to 78. I had 7 very happy years in Carrickmacross. I loved Carrickmacross, probably because it was in Monaghan. But then again, it was a boarding school, complete boarding school in the beginning. But in 1973, there was the power crisis. You're probably too young to remember all these things. There was this power crisis, and there was some sort of, the Middle East were refusing to export oil. You could run out of petrol and things like that. So keeping the central heating going was very difficult because you couldn't be sure of getting a supply of oil. And I remember going over to England for a course at that time, and all the shops, there's a glimmer of a light. It's unbelievable what I forgot about it until I was thinking about telling my story. So we started at that stage weekly boarding, and that was great because it meant you got rid of them for the weekend because you had the morning, noon, and night. Served their meals, got them up in the morning, supervised their study, went to recreation with them, saw them to bed, all this sort of thing.
Very long day for you.
You had them 24/7 in the beginning.
No break at the weekend from it.
So you still had to mind them at the weekend.
Yeah.
It was brilliant to have the weekend without boarders.
I couldn't imagine not having that breather every weekend.
So then I don't know, was it because of the free education or what, but the boarding numbers were going down. So it was decided to phase out the boarders. So I think on my last year in Carrick, we had no boarders. They were all day pupils. So that was my time in Carrick. And then I was actually transferred to Bundoran.
All right.
All packed and ready to go to Bundoran. I used to be very efficient in those days. I was probably ready in June and I didn't have to go till August. On my way to Ramsgrange for my holidays, and I passed through Rathmines, and the regional superior, you will know her from an interview, Bleeder O'Hanrahan, I both were in the dining room, and she says to me, "Would you like to go to Nigeria?" I thought she was joking. Maybe she was. I said, yeah. So off I went on my holidays, and I was only a day in Ramsgrange, and I got a phone call from Mother Columkill. Was she mother then or sister? But anyway, a phone call from her. She was the superior general. And she said, would I be prepared to go to Nigeria? And she said, you can have 24 hours to think about it. So I was thinking about it for the 24 hours, but before the 24 hours were up, I got a phone call for my answer. So I said yes. Needless to remark, my mother was not excited at the prospect. She wasn't happy about it.
Too long to make up your mind in those days.
No, we didn't.
Wow.
You didn't get to make up your mind at all.
True, but still, 24 hours, it's such a big.
Without being asked, without volunteering, you volunteered for Africa. And when before first profession, if you wanted to go on the missions, you automatically said that in the letter when you were asking to be professed.
And had you said that in your letter?
Because I always kind of wanted to be a missionary for some reason. I don't know. So anyway, I got ready and I did a course in preparation, and off I went to Nigeria, and I was going to a town. It was more than a village, a fairly big town called Ikere.
Mm-hmm.
It was in Ikitiland. It was in Ondo State at the time. The states now have increased, so I think there might be an Ikiti state. And it was a very peculiar route. I won't go into all of it because it will take up the whole interview, but let me just say that we left Dublin on Thursday at 4. We were to leave Dublin on a flight on Thursday at 4 o'clock. And that flight was delayed, which in fact meant we missed every single solitary flight along the way. We were flying from Dublin to London, London to Paris, Charles de Gaulle, Charles de Gaulle to Lagos, and then, which was unusual, Lagos to Ibadan. So we arrived in Charles de Gaulle 5 minutes after our plane had taken off, and we ended up spending a night in Jui. So it took 4 days to get to Nigeria. I had a companion who was already there and working, Monica Linden. You may have heard Monica. Actually, Monica died a few years ago, relatively recently. So we arrived in Ikere on Sunday evening. We had a staff meeting on Monday morning. We had school on Tuesday. So I didn't really have time to acclimatize. It was very strange, really. Stepping off the plane was like stepping into a sauna.
Mm.
Southwest Nigeria is extremely humid. So, and we got up for mass at 6. We went, a priest came over. There was an SMA priest there was a boys' school adjoining in the next compound, and he'd come over and say mass for the boarders and ourselves at 6 o'clock every morning. And then we had breakfast. Then it was time for assembly. School started at 7:30 because you had to get everything done before the heat of the day at 1 o'clock. So school finished at 1 o'clock. But then there was study at 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Secondary school.
The secondary, sorry, it was a grammar school. And I was teaching science and biology.
What was it, the St. Louis, which school was it you actually?
St. Louis Grammar School, Ikere, Ikiti. So the principal there was Máirín McMahon, Francis's sister.
Mm-hmm.
There were just 4 of us there. She was the principal. I taught science and biology. I think Monica taught English and RE, religious education, and Eileen did the music, Eileen Nolan. Mm-hmm. And it was very different. But I liked it.
I think it's biggest thing that you felt you got used to, what was the biggest culture shock, I suppose?
I think the biggest culture shock was the lack of water. I'd heard so much about Nigeria, but nobody ever talked about the water problem. And all our convents had huge concrete water tanks in which water was collected during the rainy season. And then it was pumped up, and because there was meant to be running water, but it came and went. So you were dependent, and so was the school, on the water that was stored from the rainy season. And like sometimes the school would have run out and they'd be coming up, they needed water, they got it from our tank. So that was quite a shock. And of course, the other one would be the electricity coming and going. Although it wasn't as bad then as it became later, but you know, you'd be sitting in the middle of something and the power would just go, and that was it. Well, the other thing was the mosquito net on the bed, and you had to bring everything in under the mosquito. You had to put it down at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, because it seems that's the time the mosquitoes came out. The ones that caused malaria, I mean, there were mosquitoes all the time. And so anything you needed at night, like a book, a torch, whatever, came into the bed with you under the mosquito net. So that was a bit of that was strange.
It would have taken a lot of getting used to. And I suppose it was probably very hot at night as well, which was probably
very hot
yeah.
all the time. Although funnily, sometimes in the morning it'd be kind of cold, and I'd wear a cardigan at assembly. But like by 10 o'clock, forget about it.
Yeah. And how did it feel? Like, what was the difference, say, teaching in Nigeria versus teaching in Ireland? Because you'd had quite a bit of teaching experience under your belt by the time you got to Nigeria.
Well, I would say the students were very eager. Now, in fact, the students in Carrickmacross, it was an all-girls school, they were pretty eager. But my goodness, these girls in Kerry, you know, they never wasted a minute. They were very, very anxious for learning and for knowledge and, you know, to do well in their exams.
That's great.
Yes.
Probably a lot to do with the fact that, you know, they didn't take education for granted over there at that time, at least.
Exactly. And as well as, even though it was a boarding school, there were day girls as well.
Mm.
And the other thing was the singing. I loved the singing and the drumming at Mass, particularly. Well, I think we had it on the Sundays. Oh, we probably had it in weekdays as well. You know, that was it. So I was barely a week there and I got malaria.
A week?
Yeah, they said the mosquito must have met me at the plane. I was quite sick with that. So I spent a lot of time, I got a lot of malaria when I was there. I spent a lot of time, we had a hospital in Addo-a-Kitty, and it was about 15 to 20 minutes drive away. And I used to end up there at regular intervals. Now, most of the time I'd stay in the convent, but sometimes I'd be in one of what they call the private rooms, which literally outside, unlocked in the compound, but those were safe times. So there were a few rooms there. So the result was I was actually sent home before I was due to go on leave. So I went home in December of 1979. But before that, we had our local leave. We only got home every 2 years. We had our local leave. And myself, another sister, she was in Addo at the time, she brought me, a pair of us went up to northern Nigeria to visit our houses in Jos and Zonkwa and Kano. And that was quite an experience. It was like a different country. And at that time too, the communities were predominantly, like we were in a Kerry, we were a completely Irish community.
Mm-hmm.
Addo-a-Kitty was completely, most of the communities, there were one or two that had a Nigerian sister in it. Mm-hmm. Because their novitiate had only started in 1963 or 64. So the Nigerian sisters were coming on now. So some communities had one or two Nigerian sisters, which must have been very hard for those sisters because especially if there were only one of them in the community. I don't know, I'd have to ask, you know, did they get their own food? Yeah. As opposed, well, of course, you couldn't get much European food anyway.
Yeah. And what sisters were they? Dorothy, Ayak, and
You have frozen. I don't know about me.
I'm not frozen here on this end.
Yeah, I lost you for a minute there.
Yeah, so what I was asking you was, which sisters now would have been there in the early days?
Well, you're not going to believe this. Winifred Ojo,
Really? Wow.
Ojo, Patricia Bebelin,
Yeah, Dorothy Ayak.
she was in the north, so there had been a novitiate in the north, and she was the only one survived out of the northern novitiate. So I wouldn't have met her at that time.
Yeah.
But I did know Patricia Ojo and Winnie and Patricia Bebelin. And I used to go to the novitiate an odd time, so I would meet some of the others then. So I knew some of them. But I was actually in 1979, before I came home, I was at Patricia Ojo's first profession in Aquila.
Wow.
So there's a story behind that, but it'd take too long to go.
We'll do a separate interview on that.
Right.
Or maybe I'll ask Pat, I'll interview the two of you together.
Let's need to do that. That'll be something, let me tell you. Anyway, and actually Winnie's sister one of her sisters was a boarder in a Kerry at the time. I don't think I taught her though.
Right, okay, interesting.
She was from, somebody's wagging a tail. I'm familiar with that sound. So I came home, and I suppose I stayed in what was the mission house. It's now St. Genevieve's. Well, it was an old, different building then.